College Football 25 Road to Glory.
How did a 5'5 running back who had gang ties in high school end up making it out of the hood? This is the story of Xavier Martinez, one of the shiftiest and fastest running backs to ever touch the field in high school. There have been very few players in NFL history under 5'9 to have a real impact in the NFL, and even fewer at the running back position. The shortest player in NFL history being Jack Shapiro at 5'1, who played in just one game nearly 100 years ago. Probably the best short running back of all time was Barry Sanders at 5'8, and most recently, Deuce Vaughn at 5'6 was drafted out of Kansas State to the Dallas Cowboys. Can Xavier Martinez make it to the NFL at his size and speed going through a small college like Troy University? Watch and find out. Troy's first game came against an average Nevada team, and it became apparent immediately that even as a true freshman, Xavier was insanely difficult to tackle. Not only was he small and elusive, but he was consistently the fastest player on the field. If good blocks were given, it set up for a big run play, and Xavier had a chance to break for a TD on any given play, making him a threat to any defense. With 3 minutes left in the game, Xavier didn't see the field for the rest of the game, and Troy got the dub 34-17. Troy had a balanced offensive scheme, and when X was a problem running the ball, it set up the play action really well. Martinez needed to fight for touches though because his coaches worried about his durability and endurance at his size, meaning that he'd have to make the most out of the touches that he got in any given game. He was on a snap count of about 15 plays to start his freshman season, and this was also limited by his ability to pass block. At his size, he would get run over by any defender, including DBs blitzing, if he tried to block them. Since he couldn't protect the quarterback on pass plays, he'd either get pulled off the field or he'd be asked to run routes. While he got pulled for most of the fourth quarter against Nevada, Xavier had earned more trust in his second game against Memphis because he came in on almost all of the crucial downs in the third quarter. To start the fourth quarter, Martinez got his second rushing touchdown of his young career, followed up by a great dump-off throw to him for the 2-point conversion. Down by 6 with 2 minutes left, Xavier stayed in to start the drive, juking one linebacker right at the gap and then picking up the first down, but there were some growing pains. Martinez failed to block for his quarterback on the following play, which resulted in his QB getting sandwiched between the two D linemen. Unsurprisingly, he got pulled off after this, but his teammates came away with the game-winning score, so Troy moved up to 2-0. Troy's third game would be their toughest test so far against the Iowa Hawkeyes, always known for their elite defense in the Big Ten. The first half was tough for Xavier, who kept getting tackled at the line of scrimmage and had just 5 carries for 11 yards. Thanks to some adjustments though in the second half by his head coach, Gerard Parker, Xavier got one huge breakaway run in the third, breaking a DB's ankles into his teammate before getting pushed out around the 25-yard line. The offense suffered a setback on second down with a sack before a short third down pass to Xavier for better positioning for the field goal. Xavier had one more dynamic play on a screen pass that definitely put college football on notice. He showcased some crazy vision, spinning back behind his blockers for a nice first down pickup, but Troy would lose in a heartbreaker 19-20. In week 4, X and the Trojans played a Division II school. Following the close loss in week 3 to Iowa, this game could give Troy the opportunity to start the season 3-1. This was a game where Xavier actually got a lot of touches as a small true freshman back. Even though he was the listed starter in the offense, he was still on a limited snap count, making him more situational. He was the idea of a glass cannon. He was explosive at the cost of physicality and potential injury risks, but the coach just let him run wild in this game. Martinez had his first real breakaway touchdown run in the fourth quarter, getting great blocks to find the edge and just outpacing all of the East DBs to the end zone. Xavier had an opportunity for his first 2 rushing TD game, but got stopped at the goal line before getting pulled out for his backup Damian Taylor to vulture his touchdown. Xavier averaged nearly 10 yards per carry, while Damian Taylor won player of the game, averaging 3 yards per carry, but with 3 touchdowns. Going into week 5, Xavier ended up coming out of Compton, California to Detroit, Alabama for college ball, and this mostly happened because Xavier didn't have a lot of opportunities available to him despite his enormous amount of success at the high school level because of his known gang affiliations. Xavier was part of a gang called 6th Street Gang, mostly by circumstance. He grew up on 6th Street with his brother Jackie and his parents Hector and Sophia Martinez, and Xavier was introduced early to this lifestyle in middle school shortly after his family moved from Jalisco to escape the cartels. It was a sick joke that Xavier and his family made it to America only for their eldest son to be recruited to a local gang in Compton. Xavier's only opportunity was to make it to the NFL and put all of this behind him. He wanted to move his family out of the hood and escape all of this once and for all, and scouts would come to his high school games, but none of them spoke with Xavier himself. They would come to watch his teammates and opponents, but Martinez was off limits for recruitment because of these known ties. Xavier was beginning to lose hope until one scout, Ted Parker from Troy, reached out to speak with Xavier, and this led to Xavier eventually meeting with the head coach Gerard, and Gerard told Xavier, "We want to have you join our program, but we need your word that you will cut any affiliation with known criminals or gang members." Xavier abided by this request, and Troy finally offered him a full scholarship in return. Xavier and Troy needed to bounce back after a disappointing loss to Texas State that derailed their opportunity opportunity to get into the top 25 this early in the season. He had a nasty run to start the game, but took a hit from 3 defenders that knocked him out until his eventual return in the fourth quarter. Even in his return, he wasn't at 100% when he came back. He was limited, but still had some valuable touches for the Trojans offense to get them over the hump to eventually beat South Alabama to get to a 5-2 record. The Trojans ran the clock out, and Troy's quarterback, Goose Crowder, had a really efficient game with 4 TDs despite a low completion percentage. 6th Street began messaging Xavier more and more as the weeks went on. JJ, the head of 6th Street, began calling Xavier daily before other high-ranking members like Vincent started blowing up Xavier's DMs on IG demanding that he respond to their messages. Eventually, Xavier got a call from his parents saying that their home had been vandalized when they came home, and all of their furniture was ripped apart and their windows were broken. There was a note left over simply saying, "Xavier must answer." X knew who had done all of the damage to his family's home, but he didn't dare call the cops. Xavier knew that 6th Street had a few local cops who were paid to look the other way around their neighborhood, and calling 911 would only make things worse, and Xavier had to convince his family of this. Martinez wanted to be done with 6th Street, but he knew that if he didn't answer, that the harassment would continue and he'd be putting his family in danger. Jackie, X's younger brother, convinced Xavier not to respond though. Any response from Xavier would guarantee that the gang would know that he could never escape from them. What Xavier didn't know was that 6th Street had been betting on Troy's games all season. They were actually betting on Xavier to do well, but when he got injured in week 7 against South Alabama and didn't hit his total yards and touchdowns, people got pissed. This was something that was totally out of his control, but it's why 6th Street was putting more pressure on him to respond. They wanted guaranteed money on their bets, and they wanted insider information from Xavier. Now, Xavier still has some old high school friends in the area. Perry, a teammate from high school, promised to look out for Jackie and X's parents while he was in Troy. Not only was this stress affecting Xavier negatively on the field, but it was also affecting his GPA in the classroom. After Troy lost another game, this time to Coastal Carolina, Xavier was put on academic probation, preventing him from playing in Troy's game the following week. Troy ended up losing again and fell to a 5-5 record. Xavier worked closely with his academic advisor to make up time in the classroom and be ready for Troy's Week 11 game against Louisiana, and Troy's offense really struggled against Louisiana early. The blocking wasn't there in the running game, and the passing game and their quarterback Crowder were totally out of sync. Xavier did what he could in this game, but to begin the fourth quarter, Troy had just 28 passing yards and was down 14-0. After a late score with Xavier already off the field, the Trojans ended up losing 14-8. Here's where things get problematic though. Xavier wanted to go home for the holidays and check on his family and reunite with them, but Coach Gerard wouldn't allow it. He demanded Xavier stay in Alabama to avoid the temptation of interacting with anyone from his past. Xavier listened this year, but he was banking on his performance this year being enough to convince a different team to pick him up in the transfer portal. Martinez and the Trojans had one regular season game left, and almost nobody had them winning against Southern Miss after a fall from a 5-2 record to losing 4 straight. Troy started the game slow again. Despite a few nice runs from Xavier, the offense failed to put up any points with 2 minutes left in the half before one great deep pass to get Troy to the 15 changed their trajectory. On second down, Xavier got some great blocks, letting him get into the end zone untouched. Troy fans were disappointed that their D gave up a touchdown before the half, but with 30 seconds left, Crowder found his number 1 receiver for another touchdown to tie it. There were some issues with sloppy plays in the third quarter. Crowder ended up fumbling a pitch to Xavier that almost gave Southern Miss the ball at Troy's 10-yard line before X picked it up for a loss. Despite a few screw-ups with execution, Troy got the ball down the field before a read option on third down that Goose Crowder messed up. If you would have handed it off to Xavier, it would have been for a touchdown, but Troy still won and the field goal was enough to get it done. Troy got the chance to play in the Hawaii Bowl against UNLV, kind of an interesting coincidence to play against Nevada to start the season and then to finish the season against UNLV. Troy failed to score more than 2 field goals in this game and UNLV ended up winning 10-6, and it was time for Xavier to move on, he thought. Will Xavier get to join one of the elite programs in the nation after a successful individual freshman year? Will his clean record his freshman year be enough to convince teams that he's changed? We will see. With dreams of the NFL, Xavier hoped a move would elevate his game and put him on the radar of scouts at powerhouse programs. However, the offers that came in were underwhelming. Small schools in the Midwest or programs without a solid football pedigree. The Power 5 schools he had hoped for didn't bite. It was a harsh reality, but Xavier stayed motivated, convincing himself that another standout year at Troy could change everything. Xavier came with a new number for the time being, trying to have a fresh start to the year, playing against a Division II school from the Midwest, and Xavier's pass blocking got tested and exposed to begin this game, but he still had his trademark explosive speed and runs that made him a valuable part of the offense. But against a Division II school, his return overall to Troy was a little underwhelming to say the least. There were some ugly plays switching field on some runs, but he did showcase his ability to be a receiver out of the backfield, something that was a part of his game his freshman year, but it wasn't exactly counted on. Either way, Xavier's team took care of business offensively and defensively with a 20-3 lead in the fourth quarter, and Troy won 27-11, and Martinez got even faster to begin his sophomore season. Troy had a David and Goliath game against number 8 Clemson and Dabo Sweeney in South Carolina, and this game could be a great opportunity for X to prove his value as a transfer signing, but the game started out with the worst quarter that Xavier has probably ever played. Whether it was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, making some bad decisions on runs, or failing to block for his quarterback, Clemson was sunning the Trojans. It wasn't until the beginning of the second that Xavier and the offense started to get some momentum, but even then it wasn't enough to put points on the board. Clemson went from being up 7-0 to having a 28-point lead in the third quarter. Martinez had 2 nice extended runs on one drive in the third quarter, but he still would get pulled off the field, not being allowed to finish drives, and Troy would end up getting a field goal at best. Ultimately, Troy ended up losing 28-3. After the game against Clemson, Xavier didn't really touch the field until the second half of their game against Memphis while dealing with some lingering injuries. Xavier started the second half by getting tackled for a loss, but quickly turned things around and started giving Troy's offense a boost, which they would really need since they were trying to wrestle the lead back. X had one opportunity to start the fourth with a 50-yard touchdown run, but got caught up by his own O-lineman's foot. He still got the first, but down 11, Troy needed a quick score. Eventually, Troy did find the end zone, but they didn't have enough time to retake the lead, and in the end fell to 1-2. Troy and Xavier had their Week 4 game against Texas State, and with a 1-2 record, Xavier was seriously questioning his decision to come back to Troy instead of just transferring to another school, so much so that he changed his number back to 5 for good luck. And that may have done the trick, as Xavier started the game with a ridiculous screen pass for 70 yards that he took to the house. Unfortunately for him, though, he was sat for the entire second quarter to get a breather and recover. He didn't touch the field until midway through the third, but he did immediately have an impact with the defense taking notice when he was back in the backfield. This left the passing game fairly open, and Troy threw for another chunk play touchdown towards the end of the third to take a commanding 20-point lead. Xavier had one more nice run and almost got into the end zone again before getting tackled down near the 10-yard line. In response to sitting in the second quarter, Xavier also had to address his stamina. Week 5 against Wake Forest, Xavier prepared like it was just any other game, but something had clearly changed. Xavier had more energy and more durability than he ever had before, and the coaching staff noticed and adjusted. Martinez was now dominating touches in the backfield and got more opportunities in the red zone and in general. Xavier hardly stepped off the field in the first quarter while single-handedly driving his team to the red zone before busting into the end zone for a touchdown. Up until this point in his sophomore season, it didn't seem like Xavier had progressed much. In fact, before last week, his stats had regressed with difficult games against Memphis and Clemson, but everything took a turn in the previous week, and Xavier went from showing flashes of being a starter to being the star of the offense full stop. Wake Forest couldn't keep X out of the end zone as he ran in for another score to start the second quarter, and of course, this helped out his quarterback in the passing game a ton with even more eyes on Xavier. Anytime X got space, he was slipperier and more elusive than he'd ever been in the past. He came insanely close to another breakaway touchdown with the time running down before the half, but got shoestring tackled at the last second, and this led to a complete 180 2 plays later with Troy's quarterback getting strip sacked and Wake Forest returning it for the touchdown to tie the game at the half. But unlike in previous games, Xavier was 100% ready to go in the second half, and he continued to break off 20-yard runs, putting his offense in good position even if he started getting pulled off the field a little in the second half. Troy did lose the lead in the third quarter, but Martinez's couple of big runs put the Trojans in position for a tying score. Fast forward to the fourth quarter with a minute left, Troy had the ball down by 1 with 40 seconds left. Normally an offense would push the ball up the field by passing in this situation, but they just rode Xavier. If he picked up the first down, that would stop the clock, but they did also have all 3 timeouts. Knowing this, they wanted to get into field goal range and leave no time left for Wake Forest to do a 13-second Patrick Mahomes impression. The offense went no huddle for a play, and Xavier ran it for a first up to the 45. Later on 3rd and 2, Troy caught Wake Forest in zone, and Crowder hit his receiver to get into field goal range with 15 seconds left, securing the win and giving Troy a winning record again. Xavier ended up with a monster stat line of 190 rushing yards on 19 attempts and 2 TDs, averaging 10 yards per carry. After seeing the benefits of continuing to work on his durability and stamina, he continued to work on his endurance. In Week 6, Troy got to play against ULM, a team that they lost to the previous year, so you know that X and the team wanted to get some revenge, and now ULM was even better this season with a 5-1 record. First play of the game, Xavier came out ready to go despite some lingering injuries from the previous week and training with a nice cutback to beat the linebackers over helping to the left. Since Xavier was clearly banged up in this game, it did limit his touches again, which prevented him from establishing a great rhythm, but he started the second quarter with another electric run past the 50. The offense had scored once without him already, and X thought that he had a wide open lane for a score, but couldn't believe his quarterback Crowder didn't hand the ball off to him for the read option. Crowder did make up for it by continuing to drive the ball down the field, hitting his receiver in stride down at the 2 before Martinez got a crack at running it in, and when he dove in, he front flipped over the line for the score, clearly not preserving his own health while trying to set a PR for touchdowns. The offense got stopped for a field goal before the half, and in the third, Crowder messed up another read option by fumbling, and ULM recovered. Xavier lined up outside at receiver in the third against a corner, showing that ULM had a lot of respect for his speed and route running, so Crowder looked for the linebacker mismatch on receiver receiver inside, and this play worked perfectly. Kudos to Coach Parker, and Troy scored again for a 14-point lead. Troy ended up winning by 7 and made a dent in the ULM Sun Belt Conference lead. The passing game went off this week, and while Xavier had a respectable performance with about 100 rushing yards and a touchdown, Peyton Higgins had a huge game at receiver too. Troy was now on a 3-game winning streak, and meanwhile, back in Compton, Xavier's childhood friend Perry was getting dragged deeper into the 6th Street gang. Perry had always been a quiet supporter of Xavier's dreams, but with Xavier away and 6th Street's influence growing, Perry found himself with limited options. Pressured by local members, Perry reluctantly joined the gang to protect himself and his family. Hearing about Perry's situation weighed heavily on Xavier. He felt responsible for leaving his friend behind and feared Perry's life might spiral out of control. Despite the issues back home, Xavier was showing signs of having a breakout sophomore season at Troy. The coaching staff had given him more touches already, trusting him as the feature back, and Xavier delivered, consistently making highlight reel plays and becoming the centerpiece of Troy's offense. National media finally started to take notice, and scouts began whispering his name. Troy fans rallied behind the underdog star, marveling at how someone so small could dominate in a sport built for larger players. It seemed that Xavier's plan to raise his profile was working, and for the first time, he felt like his NFL dreams were within reach. With their winning streak on the line and a 6-point lead, Xavier had an insane dive into the end zone again this week over Georgia State defenders for a score, but Georgia State didn't go away. They actually scored and got the 2-point conversion, tying the game, and with 18 seconds left, Troy's quarterback Crowder threw a game-winning touchdown pass to Peyton Higgins, the standout receiver from the previous week, with 10 seconds left. Troy was definitely having some heart-racing games lately, but the win streak continued. But while Xavier and the team were thriving on the field, his family's life back in Compton was unraveling. His younger brother Jackie had his bike destroyed by some gang members, a clear message meant for Xavier, and a few weeks later, his father Hector's small laundry business was targeted, set on fire in the middle of the night. The attacks were escalating, and Xavier's family was terrified. Jackie begged Xavier not to come home, fearing it would only make things worse, but Xavier couldn't shake the guilt. His success felt hollow, knowing that his family was paying the price for his escape. Desperate to protect his family, Xavier made a difficult decision. He quietly rejoined 6th Street as a silent partner, hoping his involvement would stop the chaos. He promised himself it would only be temporary, just long enough to ensure his family's safety. Xavier avoided active gang activities, instead leveraging his growing platform as a football star to give 6th Street what they wanted. It was a compromise and one that haunted him every day, but he couldn't see another way out. This affected his play again, and after he was having such an amazing streak, it almost felt like 6th Street had forgotten about him, but maybe the headlines he was making as a rising star at Troy made them remember that they had collateral to make Xavier do what they wanted. Despite a statement run for a touchdown to start the game against South Alabama, Troy went on to lose 27-14, ending their winning streak in the process. Xavier had become less focused on being a star as he worried more and more about what was going on back home, but hopefully becoming a silent partner would calm things down a bit. Now he just shoveled money to the gang and funded some of their lifestyle. He didn't rep them in any way, and that was fine for them. Xavier knew that if his coach Parker found out about him rejoining, that X would get cut from the team, and all the opportunities he was starting to get would evaporate. So X just played it cool. Whenever teammates would bring up home or family of their own, Xavier simply lied and pretended like everything was okay. Martinez didn't let his teammates get close to him or know him anymore. It was just better for them and for him. This allowed him to go out and handle business on Saturdays, and while Troy's offense was suspect all game, Xavier showed up when they needed him in the 4th for a game-changing touchdown. Troy won in the final minutes 20-16 behind Xavier's performance with 11 carries for 134 yards and a touchdown. Troy had already clinched a bowl game at this point, and now they were fighting for a spot in the Sun Belt Championship game. Martinez got tackled quickly on his first run before finding space up the middle and breaking not one defender's ankles, but 2 before going down at the 40. Afterwards, he got pulled, and the offense finished with a field goal on the drive before Xavier came in again with 3 minutes left in the second quarter. Crowder got Troy past the 50 with a pass to his tight end, but they didn't get any points from the drive. And Troy's offense was starting to sputter and struggle a little bit. Xavier's influence on the game was minimized much of the game until the 4th quarter, when Coach Parker relied on him to convert first, run the clock, and extend their lead over Southern Miss. With 4 minutes left, Xavier shut the door with a touchdown, and then, to add insult to injury, scored another touchdown on a run to the outside with 2 minutes remaining, giving him 2 TDs on 17 carries for 100 yards. With 2 weeks left in the season, it was nut up or shut up time against the Trojans' remaining Sun Belt Conference opponents. Troy's offense again started slow, but it also stayed slow the entire game. Martinez's impact was limited because teams really started playing the run, and while Martinez could be a game wrecker with space, if he was getting hit in the backfield, he wasn't going to be breaking a tackle at 5-5. With a score at 14-3 in the 4th, Troy fans were starting to lose hope when they started feeding Xavier the ball and he started getting some complimentary blocks. Troy did score a touchdown to make it 14-11, but Arkansas State answered and shut the game down, significantly hurting Troy's chances of making the conference championship game. After a disappointing couple of individual performances, Xavier was feeling the pressure to have a good game against James Madison. Win, and Troy is in the conference championship. Lose, and they were destined for a boring bowl game. Martinez had the most improbable touchdown of his career to kick off Troy's offense, spinning off multiple tacklers before diving into the end zone. Following that insane touchdown run, in the second quarter, Xavier almost broke an 80-yard score, but was tackled at the last second, bringing him down with a minute left in the half. Troy didn't end up scoring before the half and took a 7-point lead into the third quarter. Martinez continued to show his creative running and ability to follow blockers for explosives, and eventually capped off another successful Troy drive with a diving touchdown over defenders, something that he was becoming known for. Troy finished with a dominant win 31-10 over James Madison, which stamped their ticket to the Sun Belt Championship game against Marshall. X really did have a breakout sophomore season, upgrading his elusiveness and his durability, and then finishing with his first 1,000-yard season of his career, along with 10 rushing touchdowns. Troy was now guaranteed to have 2 games left in the season, extended by the conference championship and a bowl game. Xavier knew that he was going to get first-team all-conference honors, but was waiting to see if he'd make first-team All-American too. That would seal the deal for him to transfer after this year. Marshall came into this game ranked 23rd with a 10-2 record, but this was not any ordinary Sun Belt Championship game. See, initially, 6th Street was content with Xavier's presence and monetary contributions, but their demands quickly grew. They wanted inside information about Troy's players, betting lines, and anything that could give them an edge. Xavier tried to keep his involvement minimal, but the pressure mounted. His loyalty to his family and the promise to keep them safe clashed with the betrayal of his teammates. Each piece of information he passed along weighed heavier on his conscience, and Xavier knew it was only a matter of time before the wall started closing in. This development, combined with their loss to Marshall in the Sun Belt Conference Championship, really had his spirits down. He actually told 6th Street to bet on him winning conference honors, but also that he would guarantee this one time he'd get into the end zone without a doubt against Akron in their bowl game. Xavier was unusually talkative with coaches all week during practice, asking how play calling was going to work and if he could expect some consistent touches, and kept getting the same answer. Aside from our 15-play script, it really all depends on how the game shakes out, Coach Parker said. Xavier knew he needed to get into the end zone, otherwise he'd be losing members' money and could face more repercussions. Xavier thought it was a safe bet to get a score, but Troy struggled to get the run game and the offense going. The one thing that was working, though, was the passing game. Crowder hit one of his receivers for a long touchdown pass before the half to give Troy the lead. In the third quarter, Xavier was really starting to worry about getting enough touches to score. He had made up his mind. Win, lose, or draw, he was out of Troy. Even if it was unfair, he blamed his head coach for putting him in this position. But in reality, Coach Parker had set Xavier up for success in a number of ways. Troy again failed to put offensive possessions together and ended up punting in the third before getting the ball back with a minute left. They ran more wide receiver screens, and the running game and blocks weren't opening up. Xavier was screaming at his teammates during breaks on the sidelines for better blocks and was absolutely unjustified until Troy started losing in the game again by 3 at the beginning of the fourth. Crowder fumbled, and Troy fell behind by 10 points, and the walls were definitely caving in at this point for X. Not only was the bet not going to hit, but they finished the season losing the Sun Belt Championship and their bowl game, and he was freaking out about what 6th Street was going to do to his family and friends back in Cali. 2 hours after the game, Xavier got on a flight home with his future uncertain. After considering several teams, Xavier got it down to 3 schools: Duke, Oklahoma, and Ohio State. Ultimately, Xavier felt Ohio State gave him the best opportunity to go pro after his junior season and took the chance to be a starter day 1 for the Buckeyes. After a breakout sophomore season, averaging 90 rushing yards and getting 10 touchdowns, Xavier knew with a better offense around him that he could make the college football playoffs too. Xavier and Ohio State started the season ranked 3rd in the nation and had their opening game against Texas. While it was intimidating last season for Troy to play against 8th ranked Clemson, Ohio State didn't fear any team, and Xavier felt confident going into this game that he could make an impact with the best blockers he's ever had. Midway through the second quarter, Xavier had an explosive run down to the 2-yard line, and Ohio State started the third quarter with a 21-10 lead, but fast forward to the fourth quarter, and Ohio State hadn't produced anything offensively, while Texas actually came back and had a 1-point lead. The Buckeyes needed a 3rd down conversion, but Xavier couldn't hold on to the ball in traffic, and Texas got the ball again and scored another touchdown. Down 8 with their backs against the wall, Ohio State needed to produce, but found themselves in a 4th and long with the game on the line. With Xavier split out wide, the secondary coverage was smothering from the Longhorns, and Ohio State couldn't pick up the first, resulting in a massive upset win in week 1 for Texas. That game left a bad taste in Xavier's mouth, but somehow Ohio State was still ranked 3rd the following week against Ball State. Everyone in the top 10 must have lost in the first week or something. And at least Xavier got to play at home in Columbus in week 2. The offense moved the ball down the field with a balanced attack on their opening drive. As expected, Xavier was getting some great blocks early in this game, and Xavier was going to need to earn a lot of touches throughout the season, but he did get the touchdown on a touchdown run from the 1-yard line on this first drive. Martinez did well with a lot of the counter blocking concepts in this game, and he did well running routes too. Ohio State knew what to expect with a smaller running back like Xavier and used him more like a weapon and less like a pass blocker, thankfully. And there was also one positive development for Xavier over the offseason, which was that the little dude finally had a late growth spurt and went from 5'5" to 5'8", something that likely affected schools like Ohio State being interested in him during the portal. Ohio State took care of business, winning 28-0, and Martinez had 19 carries for 108 yards and 2 touchdowns. There really is no rest in the Big Ten though, as Ohio State's next game was against Oregon, now ranked 2nd, and Ohio State did actually drop in the rankings following their win against Ball State to the 14th spot. Oregon got an early lead in this game, and Xavier got some early opportunities to lead this offense. While X did well in the passing game, Oregon was all over the run at first, stopping his first 2 runs only for a yard each. Xavier started to do some damage running the ball in the second and third quarter, with Oregon putting less emphasis on the run now that they had a touchdown lead, and Oregon showed that they weren't too worried about either X or Julian Sayin though. By the end of the third quarter, Ohio State had 85 rushing yards, but just 59 passing yards for the game, while Oregon had nearly 200, and Oregon also had doubled Ohio State's time of possession. Down by 10, the Buckeyes were going to need to put a scoring drive together quickly with 4 minutes left in the game, and Xavier did what he could, but got pulled late in the drive, and Ohio State did score a touchdown, but Oregon never gave up the ball again and ran out the clock, dishing out Ohio State's second loss. The Buckeyes and Xavier got a little bit of credit for losing to the second-ranked team in the nation and somehow stayed ranked with a losing record going into their game against Kent State. Xavier was a prominent part of the offense on the opening drive, beating his man in the slot to the outside corner for a touchdown. While Ohio State was losing, his stock within the offense was rising. He was being trusted more to carry drives end-to-end, while Julian Sayin was losing trust as the QB1, but Ohio State's backup was a freshman, and Ryan Day was not going to go that route this early in the season. Another positive development for X was that with his newfound 3 inches, he also had put on some weight. At Troy, if you breathed on Xavier, he'd fall over, but this new and improved version of him could actually fight through contact a little bit and extend for an additional yard or 2. X was catching more passes out of the backfield before the end of the half, and Ohio State scored with him off the field. In the third quarter, it was more of the same for Martinez and the offense, just handling business, picking up yards, and there was no real danger of losing this game from beginning to end. In week 5, Ohio State had another chance to make amends with writers and journalists who said that they were an average team just beating up on easier competition as they played Nebraska, who was ranked 8th. Xavier made an impression early by taking 1 carry for 10 yards and then following it up on 3rd down near the 50 with a breakthrough run through the gap for a long touchdown, and once Xavier had a little daylight, nobody is going to be catching him. After that long breakaway touchdown, Xavier didn't touch the ball much in the second quarter and came back in the beginning of the third quarter, getting like a 9-yard run, and then eventually Ohio State won the game 31-21. Sayin had one of his better games of the season, while Xavier had about 13 carries for 90 yards and the 1 touchdown. Next, Ohio State was back in the top 10 and played Iowa, who had a 2-2 record. Xavier was mostly ineffective in the first half and only had 1 decent run coming in the third quarter. The Buckeyes' offense was inconsistent in this game, but they somehow squeaked out the win 14-7. Ohio State and Xavier went into week 7 against Indiana, and were you wondering what happened when Xavier returned home in the offseason following Troy's loss to Akron? 6th Street was not done with him, and not by a long shot, after he lost the gang's money when he couldn't get in the end zone in their bowl game. JJ, the gang's leader, met him in person in Compton with an ultimatum: throw 1 game for the Buckeyes this season, or face devastating consequences for his family. The threat wasn't idle. They'd already proven what they were capable of with his father's laundry fire, and Xavier was trapped. The stakes were higher than ever, and while he hated the idea of sabotaging his own team, he couldn't bear the thought of his family paying the price for his mistakes. So 6th waited on Xavier's word for when he'd be throwing a game, trying to pick his spot wisely so it wouldn't be too obvious. And in the meantime, Ohio State and X were trying to avoid a trap game loss to Indiana. Indiana showed early they couldn't stop Xavier as a runner or a receiver, so they rode Xavier down the stretch to pick up first downs and try to win this game with time expiring. Martinez got pulled and Ohio State scored, but the Hoosiers answered back, and that left Xavier only 35 seconds to try and win this game. He had a mismatch in the passing game, again that set up for a field goal to go into overtime, and in OT, Indiana missed their field goal, and Ohio State needed any score to win. Xavier almost got into the end zone on the first play, and on the next play, he did, playing hero for the day. Ohio State finished with 30 in this game, but mostly struggled throughout the game to get a rhythm, even though Xavier had 130 rushing yards and nearly 70 receiving yards. After the win, Ohio State moved up to the 5th spot and was looking like they had a great chance of making the playoffs after a rocky start to the season. They were still in the middle of a quote-unquote easy stretch of games, even though they just went to OT against a 1-win team, and the offense was looking good early in this game against Maryland, Xavier was getting big yards every run, and Julian Sayin was looking sharp without any turnovers on ugly passes to start the game. But that quickly changed with the offensive struggles late in the first quarter and beginning of the second. Sayin forced the issue on a 3rd and 8 and admittedly threw an accurate ball, but it was contested and bounced into the hands of a Maryland DB. Ohio State found themselves down by 11 before the half, and Xavier had one more run before hitting the locker rooms, and he almost took his change of direction run to the house, but got tackled just barely before breaking away. And in the third quarter, the Buckeyes really tried to establish the running game by giving Xavier a ton of touches, but it wasn't the best idea while down by so much. I get why they did it. The passing game had just fallen apart at this point, but maybe using Xavier in the passing game would have been a better idea. Xavier was getting big runs off, but whenever they got to the red zone, he was just so tired, he'd get pulled and the offense would evaporate or they'd get a field goal. It was disappointing on a roster so full of talent that without Xavier out there, they couldn't get into the end zone against even average defenses. And Julian Sayin's pick was the nail in the coffin. While Ohio State did get back into this game at the end, they ended up losing 28-26. And Morris for Maryland had a great game with 4 passing touchdowns, even if he had a low completion percentage. And Martinez also had a great game, averaging nearly 7 yards per carry for 160 rushing yards. Reluctantly, Xavier decided that he'd be throwing the game against USC in California in Week 9. He knew he needed to gain enough trust with the coaches to begin the year to not lose his opportunity to play early in the game. He also saw how his quarterback Julian Sayin struggled with picks against Maryland and thought that he could force him into some mistakes in this game. Xavier called for a pass in the second quarter with his matchup trailing, deliberately getting his quarterback to throw a pick, and even better, it was a pick 6. He also missed some blocking assignments and avoided breakout plays he could have easily taken. To the fans, it looked like a rare off day, but Xavier's teammates noticed that something was off. Ohio State's loss stung, but it was nothing compared to the guilt eating away at Xavier. He'd kept his family safe, but at what cost to his dreams? The team went from being ranked 13th to being unranked the following week with a 5-4 record. Despite the thrown game, Xavier's explosive performances in other matchups kept his star rising. He secured several lucrative NIL deals, becoming the face of a local sneaker brand and a regional car dealership. For Xavier, this money wasn't just about financial independence, it was a way to buy his freedom to some extent. He funneled some of his earnings to 6th Street, hoping to sever ties for good. The payments gave the gang a reason to back off for the time being, but Xavier knew that this wasn't going to be a permanent solution. After a breakout year in Xavier's sophomore season, he didn't expect to have a breakout his junior season too, but that's exactly what happened. Xavier was the offense at Troy, and he became the offense at Ohio State. On paper, Xavier's record was spotless. No one suspected the turmoil that was happening behind the scenes. His superstar play put him on mock NFL draft boards, with analysts projecting him as a late first-round pick, with his versatility as a runner and as a threat in open space in the passing game. X and the Buckeyes were ranked 19th after their upset win over an 8-1 Illinois team, and with his growing fame, Xavier was approached by a local Columbus reporter for a feature story. In the interview, Xavier spoke openly about his tough upbringing and the steps that he'd taken to turn his life around. He didn't mention 6th Street by name, but he highlighted the importance of discipline, hard work, and staying focused on his goals. The interview painted Xavier as a role model, inspiring fans and teammates alike. It was a PR win for sure, further distancing him from his troubled past, or so it seemed at least to the outside world. The holidays. This all started with the holidays. Things were going so well for Xavier back in Troy, but he hated the fact that his coach, Jared Parker, wouldn't let him go home to his family during the holidays. And it became pretty apparent in the following years why that was. Over the holidays this year, Xavier returned to Compton to visit his family. While home, his friend Perry convinced him to meet with JJ, the 6th Street leader. Xavier learned that another gang was threatening to take over the neighborhood, and they were known for being even more violent and unpredictable. JJ insisted that Xavier's presence as a figurehead would help solidify 6th Street's control, and reluctantly, Xavier allowed himself to be inducted into the gang again, this time as an active member for his old neighborhood. It was another compromise, one that he made to protect his family and friends. Xavier had just had a streak of massive performances versus Illinois and Northwestern before he became a part of the 24-hour news cycle. Shortly after the holidays, Xavier found himself in serious trouble. He was identified by the local police as a suspect in a gas station robbery back in Compton. The news broke nationally, and Ohio State suspended him pending an internal investigation. For days, Xavier's name was dragged through the mud, and his NFL aspirations seemed to be slipping away. However, with the help of surveillance footage and an alibi, Xavier was able to clear his name. Though reinstated, the incident raised questions within the program about his off-the-field behavior. Ryan Day had suspended him for the last game of the year, and he ended up not winning Best Running Back because of this, but he did win All Big Ten and All-American honors. Luckily, Ohio State did win their last game, but they barely missed the college football playoffs, landing in the Holiday Bowl against Virginia Tech. Xavier returned to the field determined to silence the critics, but before the game, Ryan Day called Xavier into his office for a blunt conversation. The coach appreciated Xavier's talent, but made it clear that the program couldn't tolerate any further distractions. Xavier was going to be given this last chance to play for Ohio State in this bowl game. After that, Xavier was going to be given an ultimatum: transfer to another school or face being cut from the team. Heartbroken, but understanding the gravity of the situation, Xavier decided that he would enter the transfer portal once again after this game. So Xavier knew that he had to go out with a bang. He didn't know what waited for him on the other side of the transfer portal, so this might be his best chance if he still wanted to have an NFL career. Xavier couldn't do anything wrong against Virginia Tech. Don't get me wrong, X was great all season en route to the best season of his college career, but he had never dominated a team like he did in this game against Tech. He made the first defender miss every single play. Xavier had yet another breakaway touchdown with 3 minutes left to continue piling up the points, and the game was already decided at this point, but they kept giving Martinez the ball, and he appreciated that Coach Day kept him in for this last game. With time expiring, X capped off a career performance with a 95-yard run for one last score in a Buckeyes jersey while racking up over 250 rushing yards and scoring 4 touchdowns to lead the Buckeyes to a decisive win over Virginia Tech. With no team, it was time for X to return home to find a new team and, more importantly, find out who ID'd him in the gas station robbery that almost tanked his career. After entering the portal, schools were slim despite a 1,400-yard and nearly 20-touchdown season for Xavier. Ohio State parting ways with him despite such a great season individually was a red flag, and X wanted to go to a program that would allow him to start, and that meant moving to Lynchburg, Virginia to play for Liberty University. The goal remained the same, get Xavier drafted into the NFL, but history proved that would be a difficult process. If you're not familiar with Liberty, some of the alumni to go on to play in the NFL from the program include Demario Douglas and Malik Willis. There have been only 10 players in Liberty history to ever be drafted into the NFL, and there's been just one first-round pick ever, which was Eric Green, a tight end who was picked 21st overall in 1990 who went to the Steelers. Liberty plays in the CUSA, and in week 1, Xavier and the Flames took on Sam Houston. Martinez surprisingly adjusted well to the change of scenery quickly, already averaging 7 yards per carry in his first game and on a good amount of volume. Against these middling Division I football programs, it looked like X was going to have the best season of his career with the way he could break tackles already. Liberty won their opener 35-13 behind Xavier toting the rock 25 times with 2 scores. Xavier's new quarterback, Jaden Bradford, also had a near-perfect game as well. Liberty has one legit rival, and that is Coastal Carolina and their greenish-blue turf field. The offense looked ugly in the first quarter, capped off by a play-action sack on Jaden Bradford, but on the very next play, X emerged as a savior, juking one defender, spinning off a second, and then outrunning the rest of the team on the way to a house call, and this is the type of damage that Martinez could consistently pull off in the CUSA. X got one more nice run to convert a third down and played spot snaps the rest of the game as the Flames rode their lead to the win 28-20. Now that X was where he wanted to be athletically, we could work on his technique and improving his juke and spin move more. Does Liberty have a chance to make the college football playoffs? We may be getting ahead of ourselves since we're only on week 3 of the season, but to answer that question, Liberty was going to most likely have to be ranked and win the CUSA championship game to have a bid for a playoff spot. With Ohio State missing out last year, Martinez still hadn't had a taste of the real postseason. Xavier didn't care about the individual accolades this year, but a 75-yard run for a score doesn't hurt the campaign for best running back. It's a little cliche too, but as a senior with the most game experience at the highest level of college football, Xavier became the leader of this team as soon as he transferred, and that is what his new head coach, Jamie Chadwell, had set out to accomplish. There was no fear in this Liberty team, and truthfully, based on talent on the field, they probably should have been ranked to begin the year, but you know how it goes. They have to have 6 SEC teams and 5 Big Ten teams and Notre Dame in the ranking, which pushes teams like Liberty out of the top 25. Point being, when I mean that there was no fear for Xavier or this team, it meant a total calm and confidence that every game they stepped into, they felt that they should win. Their toughest game of the season was going to be against a run-heavy Jacksonville State squad in a few weeks, but the Flames thought that they could run the table. The Flames played Middle Tennessee next at home, and the theme for this game was a balanced offense. Xavier ran the ball well, but the passing game was kind of on fire too. So while X didn't have any 80-yard runs in the first half of this game, the offense was methodically just picking up first downs, and their quarterback Bradford was making some good decisions, something that Xavier thought he'd never see again after watching Julian Sayin throw last season. It came down to the wire. Liberty got stopped for a field goal to take the lead, and Middle Tennessee answered. With the game tied and a minute left, Xavier ran up to the 50 for the first down, while Liberty was keeping 2 timeouts in their back pocket. On 3rd and 5, Liberty was just outside of field goal range, and Bradford executed on the pass, got the first, and then Middle Tennessee was going to have to start burning their timeouts. But it ended up not mattering because Xavier broke some tackles and took this one to the house to give Liberty the last-second win. Week 5 was marked on everyone's calendars. This Jacksonville State team, by ranking, was the best team that they were going to be playing in the regular season, so this is the game that Liberty had to be at their best to prove that they should not only be ranked, but be considered for the playoffs, and Xavier started the game with a bang, taking his first carry for 55 yards and finishing it off with a touchdown. Xavier also caught a pass out of the backfield, which was rare for him with Liberty up to this point because he was getting so many carries. He rarely ran routes when he was in. Going into the third, Martinez continued to dominate in this game, at this point averaging 12 yards a carry, and nobody on Jacksonville State could get their hands on this guy. It was a bit anticlimactic and low scoring, but Xavier and Liberty just ran the ball out for the rest of the fourth quarter, ran the time down, and ended up winning 17-10. At this point too, Xavier was on a crazy streak, averaging 160 rushing yards per game and nearly 9 yards per carry. Going into week 6, Liberty started to finally get some respect after getting to a 5-0 record and topping Jacksonville State to be ranked 25th. Going back to what happened at the end of X's junior season, the plan was to go back to Compton and investigate who ID'd him in that fake gas station robbery arrest, but Xavier finally smartened up enough to leave the gas station incident alone. Martinez was able to hire an agent for his senior season in preparation for the NFL draft. His agent, Jordan, advised against returning to California for obvious reasons and insisted that X instead go straight to Virginia to meet coaches and make a good impression from day one. Xavier was still a part of 6th Street, but ever since rejoining as an active member and throwing that USC game, they hadn't been on his back as much. His old friend and teammate Perry had tried to reach out with a few texts every now and then to try to stay in touch, but Xavier couldn't ever find the words to reply. Xavier wasn't going to take his second chance at redemption for granted. Yes, he was still affiliated, but he was going to be as discreet as possible, keep his family safe, and once he made the league, his family was going to vanish from 6th Street with him. Or at least that was the plan. Obviously, members would not be cool with this idea. There was going to be some backlash, but flying his family out should resolve a lot of these issues, and he was going to have to do it in the dead of night without telling anyone. X went about his business this season, though, and left the gang alone while trying to bring his team to the playoffs for the first time ever. He was doing everything in his power in this game against Western Kentucky, scoring a 70-yard TD with 5 defenders that were around him at the 50-yard line. He put the team on his back again in the third quarter, finding space, eluding tacklers, and running it down the sidelines for another massive touchdown as he outran all of the defenders on Western Kentucky. Even with these massive plays and heroics coming from Xavier, it was only enough to tie the game at the time because they were down earlier in the game. Those big runs prevented X from touching the field much later in the game as well, and Western Kentucky broke Liberty's spirit, winning 31-17 in a huge upset. Even when it wasn't necessary, X continued to put in the work off the field, upgrading his strength and durability, and as the leader of the team, younger and more inexperienced teammates relied on him after that surprise loss. They were thinking that the sky was falling and after one L, but the mission remained the same. Liberty didn't have to be undefeated, they just needed to win their conference championship and be in the top 25. It was simple, the rest would sort itself out. It is kind of crazy how disrespected they were after that loss though, moving from 15th to out of the top 25 with a 6-1 record. I get the strength of schedule, but come on. Again, control what you can control. That was the motto, and Liberty just had to play the team in front of them, and this week it was UTEP, and they were holding on to a 13-point lead for most of the game until Xavier punched in a score to take a 20-point lead that UTEP would never really threaten to come back from. And then later in the third, Liberty was called for a hold, and then Bradford got sacked, making it a third and very long, but Jaden Bradford said, "Hold my beer," and threw the ball to Xavier, his 5'8" running back, in coverage, and it worked to get the first, absolutely breaking UTEP fans' hearts. Xavier got in the end zone on the drive, and then got another chance for a breakout run, shooting the gap and outrunning any competition to the end zone before taking a seat on the bench to enjoy his 3-touchdown day. Liberty ended up winning the game 34-14, and Xavier finished with 19 carries for 180 yards and 3 TDs. Moving on to week 9, Liberty was back in the top 25 against UMass, and despite a great individual season up to this point, Xavier wasn't getting near the press or the recognition that he had in his junior season with Ohio State. Xavier was performing the best that he ever had in his career, and he wasn't moving up awards list at this point. He should be in the front for all of the running back awards, but he's either not on the list right now or he's at the bottom. But Xavier had a new focus off the field, his agent Jordan. They didn't waste any time getting down to business. Jordan was on top of everything, setting up meetings with NFL scouts, getting Xavier's profile out there. Still, even with the buzz around his name, Xavier couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He'd done everything right on the field, but the NFL wasn't a guarantee. A single bad move, a slip up during the draft process, and all his hard work could be erased, especially with his known past. Jordan was relentless, making sure Xavier stayed in the best shape possible, setting up personal training sessions, and prepping him for interviews. But Xavier's mind always drifted back to that one question: would they see me for who I am now, or the guy that I used to be? As Xavier's role at Liberty as a leader increased, it wasn't always smooth sailing. Some of the guys looked up to him, some were jealous of the attention that he was getting, and a few just didn't get it. Xavier would often find himself having to put out little fires between teammates. It wasn't always about football, it was just about teaching them that the work didn't stop when you left the field. Off the field, you had to be just as disciplined and just as focused. But some days, he'd find himself questioning if they really understood what it took to get to where he was at. Every day was a mental battle for Xavier, the pressure to perform, to be perfect, and to live up to expectations, and he carried it all silently. No one ever saw the sleepless nights or days when he'd question his worth or his value on the field. But despite everything, Xavier's name was actually starting to slowly become more recognizable in the national media. It wasn't necessarily national fame yet, but locally he was a star. On campus, fans would stop him for pictures or ask for autographs, and it felt good at first, but the pressure to live up to that image wore on him. The funny thing about being a star in a small town was that everyone knew your business. He'd walk to class and people would start talking about his game from last week, and it wasn't just about the football anymore, it was about being perfect on the field and in public, something that was definitely difficult for Xavier, and he found himself getting annoyed by the attention, wishing he could just blend in, but deep down, he knew that as long as he was performing, the spotlight was going to be following him. Xavier's family wasn't oblivious to his success either. His mom called regularly, checking in on him, telling him how proud she was, but there was always that one question: when are you going to be coming home? His little brother had gotten into some trouble back in Compton, and the weight of it started to press down on Xavier. He knew that he had to be there to guide his family, but at the same time, he couldn't risk going back. He couldn't let himself get sucked into that world again, and every time he'd think about flying back to California, he'd remind himself of his bigger goal: getting to the NFL, getting the family out, keeping them safe, keeping them away from that life. But it was hard. Family called. His old life called, and for a second, Xavier wasn't sure which way he was supposed to go. The season was starting to wind down, and Liberty needed to make it through these last couple of games without a loss. At 9-1 and ranked 12th, they were in perfect position for the playoffs, and it was a surreal feeling all around the whole campus, realizing that they could be making history. Unfortunately, Liberty couldn't score a touchdown or get a field goal before the end of the half, leaving them down 7 points going into the third quarter. The Virginia Tech defense was definitely keying in on Xavier, trying to make sure to contain him on his run plays, and even guarding him in the passing game. Liberty couldn't convert the third down and could not get points on the board, and the game was starting to get out of hand, and it got even worse on a halfback screen that Bradford fumbled, but at least Virginia Tech didn't return it for a touchdown. But then later in the game, in the beginning of the fourth quarter, an interception was thrown on an attempt to Xavier, and that interception was a result of impatience both by Bradford and Xavier on the play. And that would be the final nail in the coffin for the game, as Virginia Tech would go on to win 31-7, and Liberty thought that their chances of making the CFP were completely over. Martinez had a very average game, 15 carries for 75 yards, and Bradford had a game with multiple interceptions, but they could only go in and move on to their next game and play as well as they possibly could, and Xavier Martinez started out with a bang, taking it for 75 yards to open the game up with a 7-0 lead over Kennesaw State. And it was completely one-sided from that point on. Liberty already had a 21-0 lead when Xavier got into the end zone for a second time to take a 28-0 lead, and Kennesaw State did finally get on the board, but Xavier answered immediately, running to the outside and scoring his third touchdown of the game. Liberty went on to win the game 35-7, and Xavier got an award, National Player of the Week, with his 18 carries for 155 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it would be a rematch between Jacksonville State and Liberty, two top 15 teams in the CUSA championship game, which was very unusual. And Xavier still had some unbelievable stats: 1,700 rushing yards, 8.5 yards per carry, averaging nearly 150 rushing yards per game, along with the 17 rushing touchdowns. And for his career, averaging 7 yards per carry, along with the 44 career rushing touchdowns, and setting the single season record for Liberty's rushing yards at 1,700 as well. This game could be enough to propel Liberty into the college football playoffs, and that was always the goal, just winning the CUSA and being ranked, and that should be enough. But Jacksonville State wasn't going to be making it easy. Last time the Flames won, it was a nail-biter. Luckily, Liberty got to host this game, but the Jacksonville D was a little bit more prepared this time around to guard X, or so it seemed to begin with. Xavier had one nice touchdown at the beginning of the second quarter, and he'd been breaking a bunch of tackles, but the offense wasn't very explosive. It was kind of like Liberty was playing not to lose, but X wasn't going to be conservative going out this way. Liberty was still down 13-7 to start the fourth quarter, but 30 seconds into the fourth quarter, Martinez got open on an angle route, broke a couple ankles, and somehow didn't get into the end zone, going down right at the 1 yard line. While Xavier came off the field, Liberty did still score to take the 14-13 lead, and then with a minute 40 left, they were trying to get a field goal at the last second to win the game, but instead Xavier broke through the line of scrimmage, broke a tackle, took it for the touchdown, and Liberty came away with a 21-13 win. Aiden Williams also ended up winning Heisman, and Xavier Martinez kind of got robbed because Martinez had 19 touchdowns, Aiden Williams also had 19 touchdowns, but Xavier had almost 1,000 more total yards. And Xavier and Liberty finally did it. They got to the college football playoff game as the 12th seed, and now it was time to actually execute, playing against number 5 Oklahoma, who had an 11-2 record in a snow game. What more could you ask for in a college football program's first ever playoff appearance? The only problem was Xavier was not actually playing well in the snow. He couldn't cut quickly or create separation. He did have 2 chances to break for a touchdown in the first half, but both times he was just barely arm tackled at the last second by a Sooners linebacker. Fast forward to the end of the third quarter, and things were looking good, very good. Liberty had a 17-6 lead before Xavier Martinez got into the end zone again for another touchdown to take a 24-6 lead. And you'd think that this game would be over, but Oklahoma did score a touchdown, making it 24-13. And at this point, on 3rd and 25, just trying to get a couple extra yards, but eventually having to punt back to Oklahoma. And eventually, Oklahoma somehow takes the lead 28-24 when Liberty had a massive lead going into the fourth quarter. Down by 4 with 30 seconds remaining in the snow, Liberty ran the ball and Xavier couldn't get the first. Liberty took a timeout and ran on 4th, expecting Oklahoma to actually play the pass, but no, Martinez was shut out and Oklahoma had a miraculous comeback win, and Xavier couldn't believe his college career just ended like that. Oklahoma scored 22 unanswered in the fourth quarter for that comeback victory after they were down 24-6, and Martinez didn't have a fantastic game, averaging about 3 yards per carry, but now it was time to move on to the NFL draft, and Clemson ended up winning the whole thing.
Today, Xavier Martinez, former star running back at Ohio State and Liberty University, has been arrested in Compton, California, in connection with a string of home robberies in the Beverly Hills area. The former college football star just finished his senior season at Liberty University in Virginia before the NFL draft in the coming months.
Xavier made his debut for the Montreal Alouettes in their second game of the season in the CFL. Martinez hopes to prove his value to NFL scouts, but it's not his play on the field that was questionable to NFL teams.
Good morning, Montreal. An update on the football game last night. Star running back Xavier Martinez went off the field in the second quarter after a knee injury, and we can now confirm that it is a torn ACL. Xavier will be done for the season after only his third game. In that time, he averaged 200 yards per game with 6 touchdowns total. Get well soon, Xavier.